In 2024, I introduce you to Shelve It or Scrap It, a monthly reading challenge where I read randomly selected books from these stacks on the floor of my library. The goal was to get all of the books from the floor onto my shelves or scrapped into my Unhauled pile by the end of the year. We started 2024 with 70 books in the stacks, but despite shelving 35 books and scrapping 57 books throughout the year, holding 64 less books than in 2023 and thus making a positive dent in my own TBR as a whole, we actually ended the year with one more book in the stacks than when we started. So in 2025, I have to up my game. The rules remain the same, but I now have to read the same amount of books per episode as I've hauled in the previous month, so that by the end of this year, I will hopefully reach my ultimate goal of getting all of the stacks off the floor and into a proper home, either on my shelves or on somebody else's. In episode 12, I shelved 3 books and I scrapped 8, and we are going to be starting episode 13 with 70 books in the stacks. Hello my guys, welcome back to episode 13 of Shelve It or Scrap It, the vlog series where I try and get these stacks of books off the floor of my library onto my bookshelves through any means possible. Now if this is your first time at this rodeo, then I will put the full Shelve It or Scrap It playlist down in my description box so that you guys can catch up ahead of episode 13. But for those of you who've been here before, buckle up buttercup, because do I have an episode for you this month. So first off, I would like to apologize for the boo-boo that I made at the end of episode 12 because I forgot to update you guys on where we were with the stacks. So at the beginning of episode 12 we had 71 books in stacks, and throughout the course of the episode we knocked it down to 65. Now I have just added the books from my January unboxing into the stacks, and so for the start of episode 13 we are back up to 70. Now regarding books that I haul throughout the year, I am aiming to do things a little bit differently in 2025 than I did in 2024. So previously I was putting all of my monthly subscription box books into the stacks, and all of the books that I hauled outside of that I was putting in a separate stack up until the point where I filmed my book haul, and after the book haul was filmed I was then moving all of those books onto shelves and into the stacks as well. So this year, instead of doing that, we are eliminating that extra pile, and when I'm hauling books I'm just making sure that I record them in my spreadsheet so I don't forget about them when it comes to recording a book haul, but I'm then shelving them or putting them into the stack straight away. So this is going to keep the number in the stacks consistently higher, but what it should do is it should stop us from dropping the number into the stacks really low, thinking that we're doing really well, and then doing a big book haul and just ending up back where we started. So we should be able to see consistently throughout the year where we're at. Now, typically I read between like 7 and 12 books in a month, and I never really haul more than 10. Like if I haul more than 10 books in a month, then something questionable has happened, or like I've hauled an entire series or something. That's very unusual for me. So hopefully we should see a gradual reduction in the overall number of books that we have here. Given that I've just given you an update on what's going on behind me, we are going to be forgetting about these for the majority of this episode, because today I'm going to be doing a follow-up to episode 8. So I do have another series on my channel that I make annually, which is called These Books Will Self-Destruct in 12 Months. In that video, I select a stack of books from my shelves that I'm unsure about, like I'm not sure if I want to read them, but I do want to give them a try, and I set them aside and I give myself a 12-month period to read them, and if they remain unread after 12 months then I have to unhaul them. Now in 2024 I thought that I was being clever because I set aside a stack of 10 sequels, thinking that this would give me a little bit more drive to actually sample the books that I'd put aside. However, that video expires in March, and I currently have only read the books from that stack that I read in episode 8 of Shelve It or Scrap It. So in episode 13, I have to read the rest of my self-destructing books from 2024. So as per the rules of 2025, the number of books that I have to read for Shelve It or Scrap It is now the same amount of books that I hauled in the previous month. And for January, I hauled 7 books, which ain't too bad. It's the same amount of books that I read, so we've broken even in that regard. So in total, I had 5 books that were in my December unboxing, and then I picked up an extra pretty edition of Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte because it's one of my favorite classics. Shouldn't have done, but I did. And I also received a PR package from Galanx that contained An Arc of the Devils by Joe Abercrombie. So in episode 8, I managed to read, or at least attempt to read, 4 out of the 10 self-destructing sequels I'd set in 2024. So now I'm going to read the remaining 6 And then I also have to find another one to balance the amount of books that I hold last month. I think we are going to maybe have to break the rules throughout this vlog because typically I can't add any new books into the stacks while I'm filming the episode. However, when I did episode 8, I pretty much got through all of the books from this stack that I was 95% sure that when I read or attempted to read the sequel, I was going to unhaul them. For these ones, I'm not too sure. We have a Sanderson book in here. We have adult epic fantasy. We have some questionable fantasy romance in the I enjoyed the first book and so did a lot of people, but I've heard that the sequels aren't as good. So I feel like there is more possibility for shelves in this stack, which of course means we're going to encounter problems when it comes to potentially wanting to shelve one of these and having to take something else off the shelves instead. However, when we scrap one of these, we are going to be scrapping an entire series. If I scrap this book, I'm going to make a lot of shelf space because I own 4 books of this size in this series. So I think we're going to do it on a like numerical balance. So if I scrap this and I manage to shelve 6 books and then I shelve this and so I have to add 1 or 2 books to the stacks, then we're still like 4 books shelved for the episode, you know? Does that make sense? Because I know that I pretty much have to get through this entire stack, I was just gonna work through it, but I decided it would be a little bit more fun and in the spirit of what we usually do for Shelve It or Scrap It if I randomly selected the books that I read so that I know that I have to read these books, but I don't know what order I have to read them in. So actually, I've added all of them to a spinner wheel, and last night I managed to finish the book for my like last weekly vlog in the morning. So later in the evening, I decided to pick the first book for this video ahead of time so that I could have a tiny bit of a head start. Why? This was probably the worst case scenario for this video. I can't be too mad about it because I have to read it if I'm reading all of the books in this stack, but this is actually the main reason why I wanted to randomly select the books, because I could not decide whether it was better to try and get through this brick first and have a slow start to the episode, or try and tackle it last and have a slow end to the episode. So the wheel has spoken and we are going to be tackling The Memory of Souls by Jen Lyons first. I can't actually at this point tell you what this series is about because it has been so long since I've read books 1 and 2. I think I read them in, I think it was 2022, but it could have been 2021. And I read them pretty quickly, one after the other. Book 1 in this series is called The Ruin of Kings. And in that one, we are following a young man, boy, I can't remember how old he is. He's like in his late teenage years, I think at the oldest. But essentially the draw of this series is the way that it's told, because we have a story within a story. The main story is kind of like a frame or a report of somebody telling the events of the book. And then you also have the story within the story that starts at an earlier part. So in book 1, we are following a monster and this boy, Kirin, and the monster asks the boy to tell her his life story. So he starts at like this random point where he thinks that his life got exciting, and she stops him and she's like, no, actually your story started here, and she takes it further back in time, and then eventually the 2 stories match up. So I actually really enjoyed book 1, even though I was very confused by it because we have so much going on in this series. It is epic fantasy, it's also complex, and personally, based on my taste in fantasy, it is not the best delivery of a fantasy story that I've ever read, because I want to know enough about the world to kind of puzzle things out myself instead of relying on the author to reveal things to me at points in time that they feel it's necessary. I like there to be more clues laid out that the reader can pick up themselves, and I just feel like this series is a lot. But the reason why I put the brakes on this series, the reason why book 3 has ended up as a self-destructing book, is because I did not like book 2. I ended up giving book 1 4 stars. Book 2 was a 2-star read, and that is because I worked so hard to understand The Ruin of Kings, and by the time I got to the end, I was still very confused, but I felt like I knew where the story was going. And then we go into book 2. And book 2 is just a repeat of book 1 with a different main character. So we are once again following two people telling a story from different points in time. We are following a main character that we had met in the Ruin of Kings but wasn't the focal point of the Ruin of Kings, and we are now hearing her story. There is a present day unfolding of the story which does carry on from the Ruin of Kings but is almost frozen in time, in that it takes place in this kind of one location over the period of a night. And then on top of that, we are learning this new character's story, or this new focal character's story from earlier in their life up until this present day. So what that meant is that by the time I got to the end of book 2, I had not forgotten, but lost the thread of where I was at the book 1, where I felt prepared to continue on with this story, which I believe only picks up at the beginning of book 3. So essentially, The Ruin of Kings and The Name of All Things are two enormous prologues, and that really put me off. I did make a start on this last night. I am relying heavily on the glossary because I forgot how complex this world is. We have gods, we have god kings and queens, we have people who are reincarnations of maybe god kings and queens, maybe just like influential historical figures in this world, and it's just so hard to keep track of who is who. Everybody is the convoluted child of somebody else, and as well as being reincarnated and as well as potentially being god kings, god queens, or maybe even gods themselves, and it is just a lot to understand. I do really like Jen Lyon's writing style though, which is kind of the thing that made me want to continue and give book 3 a try. But honestly, this series to me just requires you to expend a lot of mental energy for very little payoff. Like, I don't feel satisfied at the end of these 800-page books. I actually just feel exhausted and underwhelmed because I'm leaving almost just as confused as I was when I started. So I imagine that this is going to be a slow one. I am doing Patreon sprints for a few hours this afternoon, and I am planning on knuckling down and tackling this. Like with a regular episode of Shelve It or Scrap It, I can DNF these at any time and decide that they're not worth it. Some of these, I feel the problem we're going to encounter is that it's been so long since I read the earlier books that I don't remember them enough. Like, I looked up recaps of the first 2 books in this series. I found one that wasn't good enough. Like, it wasn't a good enough recap of book 1, and then there wasn't one for book 2. They do have short summaries at the beginning, but the thing I struggle with is that it tells you like this person did this, but it doesn't tell you who the person is in relation to like everything that is going on. So there's potential that we're gonna find books throughout this video where I don't remember enough to continue, but I'm also not invested enough in the series to ever want to reread. I am making very good progress on this book. We only started this vlog yesterday and I am already 200 pages into it, which is over a quarter of the way through, but I am also having regrets about making this video because I don't hate this. I really expected this one for me to get a certain amount of the way through it, realize I was completely lost, that I wasn't invested enough to reread the first 2 books in the series, and decide to scrap it. Like, that was my prediction for this book. I'm not having a bad time. I feel like Jen Lyons is doing a really good job of recapping me on certain elements of this world. So it does have footnotes, and the footnotes are probably some of the most useful footnotes I've ever read in a book, if I'm being honest. A lot of the time I find them unnecessary, and while these are a stylistic choice, they're also proven to be incredibly helpful when it comes to reminding me on what has actually happened in this series. So it's surprisingly easy to follow. It is still a lot when it comes to who the characters are, because some of our main characters are not only the person they are in this lifetime, they are a reincarnated version of somebody else who was influential in the history of this world, as well as being like the descendants of like some of the gods and the god kings, or part of like the magical races of this world. There are some people here who are shapeshifters as well, or have like changed into somebody else's body, so they're actually somebody else who is still reincarnated and also like the daughter or son of a god or a god king, but also in somebody else's body. There are explanations in here about how relationships aren't incestuous, because technically people aren't related, because technically they're not in the bodies that they should be in, even though they have like the same great grandparents, and everything is just so much. And I feel like that is my complaint with this series, is that it feels complex for the sake of being complex. I love complexity, I love intricacy, but I like it to have a point. Like, I like the intricacy and the complexity to blow my mind, not for it to just be so convoluted for what is apparently the sake of it, just so that everybody is somewhat related because they are all descended from the same god but have been reincarnated 37 times. I also feel like this general theme leads to some conveniences, because we'll have instances where we meet a group of people from a part of the world that speak a language that none of our characters speak, but oh wait, all of our characters are reincarnated, so in a past life they did speak this language, and magically they have just remembered this element of their past life right this second so that we can communicate with this group of people. And it all very much makes sense within the theme of these books. They are funny as well, they're humorous, there's like a light tone to them. They're also like heavily action based in some areas of them, and the tone is quite light and like jovial. So I feel like all of this kind of goes hand in hand to create a certain tone. Typically it's not the kind of thing that I enjoy. In spite of that though, like I'm having a good time with this. I feel like I like the writing style and the concept of this world, but I think it's just a little bit too chaotic for me. And that is why I really liked book 1. I didn't like book 2, and this one is also turning out to be one that I really like. I'm interested to see though like how it kind of resolves in the end, because it was a good like 3 years ago that I read book 1, maybe 4 years. I honestly can't remember what year it was. And I gave it 4 stars, and I'm wondering now that I'm not as generous in handing out ratings as I used to be, whether this is still going to be a 4-star, like whether I'm gonna feel the same way about it as I did book 1 and still give it a 4-star rating, or whether it's gonna end up being like more of a 3-star. I'm wondering whether even if I enjoy this one, whether I'm going to decide whether it's worth continuing on. I feel like I'm gonna have a hard decision to make about this series, is essentially what I'm saying, because I feel like I'm not super invested in it, but I feel like I'm also enjoying it too much for it to be an easy DNF and like a scrap for me. Something that I did not realize when I started this series is how similar it is to Wheel of Time, because I started Wheel of Time I think at the beginning of 2023, and I read the first 2 books in this series either in 21 or 22, so I truly had no idea when I was reading The Ruin of Kings and The Name of All Things. But it is so glaringly obvious that Jen Lyons was heavily inspired by Wheel of Time for this series, and it's made even more obvious to me right now because I'm currently listening to 1 hour per day of the audiobook of The Gathering Storm alongside The Memory of Souls in preparation for a live show. So not only am I reading things in here and thinking I know what inspired this, but I'm also seeing a side-by-side comparison to both of the series, and I would even say that this is kind of like Wheel of Time in a different font, because the main similarity I guess is that the main adversary in both of these series is somebody who, like a dark lord that was trapped and is slowly breaking free of his prison. The names of the places where they are and the names of the person, I guess, are very similar in Wheel of Time and in A Chorus of Dragons. And we also have, although in different ways, we have this cyclical nature of the plot. So in the Wheel of Time, obviously it's that the wheel keeps turning and everything that happened in one age is going to happen in another, and then you have this handful of people who are able to actually alter the pattern of that weave and actually change things that will directly affect ages to come, so that the same things don't keep happening over and over again. Whereas in this one we do still have reincarnation. The main character of Wheel of Time is this reincarnated figure who plays a pivotal role in the battle between light and dark, and we have this same situation happening in the Chorus of Dragons, but taken to an extreme, because as I've already mentioned, like everybody is related to everybody, everybody's a reincarnation of somebody else, they're all children of gods or brothers and sisters to god kings, or like they're the son of somebody whose husband was actually their husband in their past life and things like that. Like it's all super convoluted, but it all still follows this pattern of kind of like reincarnation. And what we're focusing on right now in the plot of this is that the prison weakening that is trapping this like Dark Lord figure is something that has happened before, and every time it happens, society or certain areas of society do something that kind of traps this figure once again, knowing that it isn't a permanent solution. So they've had at this point like 3,000 years to solve this problem, and they're at the point now where like even if they do the thing that will prolong the imprisonment of their enemy, it's not going to last for very long, and it's a problem that they're going to have to deal with very shortly. And they've currently had 3,000 years to deal with it and have done absolutely nothing. So I would say that the two series are actually very similar. The tone in this is very different, but there is a lot going on between the two that are extremely comparable. And on top of that, something that happened in the last 100 pages of this is a plot twist that is also a major plot twist of the Stormlight Archive series by Brandon Sanderson, which I thought was interesting, because if y'all don't know, after Robert Jordan died, Brandon Sanderson took over the series and wrote the last 3 books in the Wheel of Time because he was such a massive fan. Like, he himself has been heavily influenced by Wheel of Time, and I started rereading the Stormlight Archive. I was supposed to finish it all last year, ready for Wind and Truth. I didn't. I read the first half of Way of Kings, but immediately going into that and rereading it, having read a lot of the Wheel of Time series, I also started to see the influence that Jordan had on Sanderson. So I think it's also interesting that something that we've just discovered in this book is one of the like major plot twists, like reveals in the Stormlight Archive. However, done nowhere near as impactfully as it is in Stormlight, because in Stormlight, like, it just blew my mind, and in here it's kind of just seems thrown in. Not that it's not a major reveal, but more that just, like I said earlier, there's a lot of things that happen in this series because of the style of it that seem like conveniences, like, oh, we happened upon this group and because of a past life one of us just happens to speak this language that we never actually knew we spoke until this moment. It's kind of that. And I guess you have 2 different types of authors. I'm not a writer, so I don't know the technical terms, but I know that this is like a common thing. You have writers like Robert Jordan, like George R.R. Martin, like Tolkien, who build this vast and intricate world before they put the characters on it. So the world is bigger than the plot of the series, and it's very well thought out kind of before you even put the characters on as like these playing pieces on the board, the world being the board. That is my preferred type of fantasy. And then you have the other type where the characters and the plot are at the forefront and the world is built around them. So maybe there wasn't an abandoned palace in the swamp until the plot needed there to be an abandoned palace in the swamp, and the author builds the world based on the character's needs or the plot's needs in that moment. And that very much feels like the kind of fantasy that A Chorus of Dragons is. And it's interesting because I'm beasting through this. I am now 418 pages in. Just one more day has passed since I last spoke to you. So I am enjoying this enough that I can read like 200 pages a day of it, because if I was not enjoying it, trust me when I say this would not be possible. You all have seen me DNF a book at 20 pages because I couldn't even make it through 20 pages. If I wasn't having at least somewhat of a good time with this, I would not have made it halfway through. But at the same time, I also don't like it, and it's really weird because I obviously like it enough to get this far in. I like it enough to be in the 3rd book of this series. There is something about this that I enjoy, but there's also a big part of me that just doesn't care whatsoever. So I'm still intrigued as to what my verdict on this is going to be, because like, where do you draw the line? Like, I enjoy this more than I've enjoyed other books that I've read in the past. Do I enjoy it enough to continue? Like, how much do you have to enjoy something to want to continue on with it? Am I going to be desperate to pick up book 4 after this? I mean, it depends on the ending, but not necessarily. So if I'm not super eager and actively wanting to read something, if I'm just kind of passively having a good time while I'm reading it, is that enough to continue the series? I don't know what my answer to that question is going to be yet, but let me know down in the comments what you think, because I'm very interested to know. I'm gearing up to finish this today. I'm on page 640, so I just have 110 pages left. And I think today I'm hitting the point where I am kind of sick of the antics of this book. I do find it mentally exhausting, not only because it has so much that you have to keep track of, although I will say that Jen Lyons does a really good job of recapping you or clarifying things in the footnotes to really help you keep track of things and like remind you of people's other names and who they're reincarnated into and from and all of that kind of stuff. But just because a lot of it is very action-packed. Now, I do think that it's balanced well because we're always dipping between perspectives. I don't think we ever have the same perspective in 2 consecutive chapters throughout this book. So we're mainly following Kieran, Janelle and Teraith in this one. And then we also have like side characters that come and go throughout the book. So for the first portion, we were following 3 female characters who are trying to kill, I think it's a demon. And then they kind of fade out for a little little bit and we move to like the parents of one of the main characters and they form a section of the book, and then you'll still have the main perspective of Kirin, Janelle or Teraith, and then there'll be like a different set of side characters forming like the third quarter of the book. And I feel like the main characters are always getting into some sort of antics, but when they're not, the side characters storyline picks up a little bit. So I feel like the pacing is good in that regard, but I do feel like this is a relatively action-packed series. Once again, not my favorite. So at this point, with 110 pages to go, I am still not sure what I want to do with this series. I am leaning towards a scrap because a shelve would make my life difficult. Just straight off, it would make this video difficult, but that's not actually like the real reason why I would choose to scrap this. But the only real reasons I have to want to shelve this right now is that they do look really good on my shelves. I have 4 of these books, so I have 1 more after this that I haven't read, and they look stunning. And also I do like to keep fantasy series I've read almost like trophies. Like reading 3 of these books is no small feat, and I feel like that is kind of my hold up when I'm thinking about this series, because like I said, at this point I'm ready for this book to be over. I enjoyed it for the first 550-ish pages, and now I'm feeling the fatigue of being in this world for so long. I don't think that I would ever, actually I know that I would never choose to reread these books. I do think that Memory of Souls is like the fan favorite. Like the people who love this series think that Memory of Souls is the best, and while I wouldn't mind continuing and reading another book in this world, like to this point I have had a good time, it's not like when I put this book down I don't think I'm going to be desperate to pick up the next one. I mean, we'll see, because I do have the next one, so I could even literally shelve this and pick up the next book if I wanted to. But yeah, I guess I'll check in again in 110 pages and see if my thoughts change at all. I don't remember the end of books 1 and 2 in this series being so dynamic that it kind of gives me any drive to continue the series immediately, but who knows, because the first 2 pretty much read like prologues, whereas this feels like the first true chapter in progressing the story. So I finished The Memory of Souls last night, and honestly I could have DNF'd with like 80 pages left. I don't know whether it was just fatigue, because obviously this is such a long book and I truly have just like steamed through it, but it also, like, I remembered the very end note of this was intriguing and made me a little bit more interested, I guess, in going into book 4. But aside from that, the end of this book and the end of the books before are more of like high action scenes, which aren't my particular favorite. I mean, with being somebody who does read fantasy, it's something that I just have to deal with. Like the majority of fantasy does have action scenes in it, and it does tend to be the climax of a book, but they are never the most exciting parts of books to me. So this is actually a common thing that I feel when I get to the last like 150 pages of a book. I'm like, okay, I just want this bit to be done. But I did overall give this one a 3-star rating. So I definitely think that it was better than book 2. And then, as I was talking about earlier, I do feel like that if I had read The Ruin of Kings now as opposed to a few years ago, then that would have also gotten a 3-star rating from me as well. I think that this series has a lot of potential, and by that I don't mean that it hasn't achieved its potential, that it's not a good series. I actually think that this is decent, but just for a different kind of reader. I think if you like more fun, high action, humorous stories, then this would be for you, even though I don't think this series is necessarily for me. I am quite a serious person. I like serious books, and so when things are kind of like fun or funny, or when everyone's kind of like frolicking around, making mistakes and laughing about it, I just can't really get behind it very much. And it's really frustrating actually, because there's so much about this series that I like, and I'm not frustrated as in I'm frustrated with the book. I'm just frustrated because it's not the kind of book for me. And I know that this series will be a hit with so many people who like things that are faster and punchier, but maybe still want that level of complexity that you get with big like adult epic fantasy authors like Robert Jordan, like Brandon Sanderson. And I actually do really like the majority of the components in this series. The only thing that I genuinely don't like is how convoluted the whole like reincarnation, everyone's related to everyone, everyone's the child of a god, and then there's god kings, there's also like 8 dragons, but the dragons used to be gods, and like people that are characters are also dragons. Like if you took all of that stuff out of it, which for me I feel like that really adds to kind of like the chaotic note of this series, then the rest of the components, what we have here with the 8 gods, the god kings, the 4 immortal races, the 8 dragons, these characters that are tasked with saving or ending the world, all of that stuff is up my alley, but it is really a matter of tone. And I can kind of compare it to Joe Abercrombie in that regard, because while Joe Abercrombie is a different kind of writer, lighter, still a little bit humorous actually, and playing with the conventions of the genre in that way. That is very much grimdark, whereas I wouldn't say this is grim things happen, but it is more like a fun adventure tone with some more serious notes than it is like death, despair and destruction in the First Law series. But that, once again, like the First Law is very similar to Game of Thrones, but tonally very different, and it's the tone that I don't love about it. Also, throwing it back to me being a serious person that likes serious books, I don't necessarily love it when authors play with the conventions of genres in a way that kind of pokes fun at the genre, because I don't necessarily find it funny. Not to say that it doesn't have its place and it shouldn't be done, it's just not a hit for me. I just don't like it. So with all of that in mind, I do feel like this should be a scrap. However, I am going to be especially awkward. Yeah, no, never mind, it's going to be a scrap. I was going to say if I could rotate the books this way and stack them up and get 4 in line, then I would consider a shelve, but it looks like it is going to be a scrap. And I am going to be honest, the only reason I want to keep them is because they're pretty. I like how full fantasy series look on my shelves. Like, look at the Falling Kingdoms, like they just look so nice, and especially because these are such like thick spines with solid text. I love them. They're also next to Game of Thrones, which is another full series, and it all just looks very nice and very pretty. That's the thing, like I'm not desperate to go into book 4. I'm sure if I did go into book 4, I once again would have a decent time with it. I just know that I'm not really going to be in any rush to do that, but I actually think I'm going to take maybe a middle ground with this, because part of me as well has just invested so much time into these books. They're all really thick. Like if I get down books 1 and 2, like that is a substantial amount of series that I have read, and look how pretty they are. So this kind of like part of me doesn't want to throw all of this progress away, because it's not that I dislike the series, it's just that I don't love it. And like I was saying, I asked your guys' opinion in the comments, like at what point do you decide something's not worth it? Like if you enjoy something, how much do you have to enjoy it to decide to DNF or continue? I do have book 4 as well, which is 4 pages shorter. It's 747 pages. So part of me is tempted to, just unhaul these ones and keep this one, and then unhaul it like when I've read it, still continue the series but not keep them. But actually there's maybe one more trick I can try to condense books that I already have and maybe get to keep them. We'll see. Let's do a little bit of a rearrange. So down here I have like a bunch of Sarah Shepherd books that used to be stacked up, and they ended up like back in normal formation, but I'm thinking that if I were to like stack these, they would take up much less space, and then maybe I could move some stuff along. We are going to struggle when we get to Game of Thrones, because that is currently stacked and it would have to be unstacked to keep everything alphabetical. What if? I really do feel like that gave me nothing. Oh, it maybe gave me a little bit of something. Maybe didn't give me enough though. Okay, now we do have gaps, but to make things alphabetical, like it's not gonna work. It does really upset me to take them out of order. Is there anything that I can kind of add or like borrow from the stacks? But when it works so well, like what can I do? The perfection of that, is there anything more satisfying than that, guys, really? I don't like to have these stacked normally because they're like mass market paperbacks. Could make a cute little like lit fix stack there. Still doesn't really help with that though. Okay, here we are. So we're just gonna do it the other way around. So I will move this here and I'll stack from the bottom. Actually, because this was published after Game of Thrones, but it's a prequel, so I might even, can I get that one on there? No. I'm gonna put the prequels here. I don't know if they're in chronological order. I feel like they would go that way in chronological order. And then the Ice Dragon. And now we need to figure out if I've left enough space here. Never mind, I actually got the Ice Dragon back in there. Can we stack them? Oh, we can. We actually even have space there. Okay, it doesn't really matter which way they go, so I'm gonna actually turn them the other way because I like the names the right way. I do think though that the final book in this series is gonna be a little bit too thick to go in that gap. And we've got space. So I'm gonna go and find a book out of the stacks to go here. I've swapped the Mark Lawrence books around. I did have them in order of publication, so Prince of Thorns series came before the Book of the Ancestor, but I guess now they're in series alphabetical order. And then I have Sparrow by Mary Cecilia Jackson, which I don't know if this is gonna go. Can I get another one on? The Unbecoming of Mara Dyer by Michelle Hodgkin. Oh, yes. So I feel like that was a more successful outcome than we could have imagined. Not only did I actually manage to get the book that I just read, that I know I should have unhauled it. I know I should. And I also know that it's very likely that at some point in the future, I'm going to revisit this and be like, you know what, we need to unhaul these. But I do, part of me does just generally keep big fantasy series I've read as trophies. I know I unhauled some of the First Law series, but I think it was only 2 or 3 of them. I kept all of the ones that I only got rid of the ones that I really didn't like. And I mean, I've got books 1 to 7 of Wheel of Time here. I even stopped buying them after book 7 because there was no reason for me to spend that much money on books that I was giving 3 stars to, and I started getting them from the library. I just love the look of a big fantasy bookshelf. What can I say? So that takes us back to the wheel to pick another book. But to be honest, apparently this is my impatient episode because I did finish The Memory of Souls in bed last night, and I knew that if I couldn't get it onto the shelf, then I was just going to be pretty much unhauling it. And so I did have an idea that I would be going back to the wheel. I'm currently listening to the audiobook of book 12 of Wheel of Time at the minute, but I don't have a physical read going on. So I have already picked my next book off the wheel. This is not terrible, but I also don't know how it's gonna go. King of Sword and Sky by C.L. Wilson. This is not one that I was necessarily dreading coming up, but it's one that I'm not especially looking forward to reading. This is also one that I have technically already DNF'd in the past. It is a soft DNF, and it is actually the oldest book on my currently reading on Goodreads. It is still there, and I started reading this series in 2020. I think around this time actually, because I think I put book 3 down for a readathon that I think was in February. I do feel like it was in February, but I could be making that up. I mean, my Goodreads will say, but essentially I was, how many pages in? I was 146 pages in, my bookmark's still in there, and I put it down to participate in a readathon, and then I kind of just never came back to it. And honestly, when I do that, I don't do it very often, but when I do, it is very, very rare that I ever come back to a book. So the only reason that I am is because of this challenge, really. And I didn't hate this. I didn't necessarily dislike it, but there were elements of it that I didn't love. So this one is a fantasy romance series, and it is one that was recommended a lot. Before Book Talk was like super hype. So before fantasy romance and romantasy got super popular, there wasn't a whole ton of recommendations around. Like, people weren't deep diving into indies like they are now. There wasn't a whole bunch of traditionally published fantasy romance around. And this is a very kind of like classic story. It's in the same kind of style as things like Hercules and Xena Warrior Princess, which are TV shows from, I think it's like, is it the 80s or the 90s? They're very kind of like campy fantasy, and that is what this reads like to me, like that same kind of style. But it has very classic gender roles. I wouldn't say that our female character is weak. I would say that she possesses her own kind of strength, but it's very much like the man in this relationship is a big strong warrior type and the woman is like a gentle healer. And she does definitely possess her own strength, but she's also not going to be riding in on a dragon with a sword like my typical heroines of like fantasy and fantasy romance are. And because of that, I wasn't really rooting for the romance in here. Now, this series does have an updated set of covers now, which I don't think are like the most stunning things I've ever seen, but they're more in keeping with like modern iterations of fantasy romance. I do think there's something special about these classic covers. However, part of my reason why I can't get behind the romance in this is because of this man. This man is not doing it for me, unfortunately. But if I can remember correctly, this one is about a man who is the king of the Fae and his people are dying, and he asks like this crystal ball ball for an answer to how he can save his people, and he sees like an image in the crystal ball of this human woman called Elisetta Barastani. The way that I remember that woman's iconic name, normally I'm telling you about a book and I can't remember the main character's name and I'm literally reading it right then and there. So he travels to the mortal lands to find this woman who he believes is his mate. However, he is very confused as to how a mortal woman can be the mate of the king of the Fae. There is, I think, a historic war in this series between the, I think, are they mages or wizards, and the magic wielders and also the Fae, and that kind of ignites again with this mortal woman or seemingly mortal woman being at the center of the conflict. I'm pretty sure if I remember correctly, the Fae are shapeshifters in here as well, and that is the reason why this series is called Tyrant Soul, because they shift into these like big cats. I can't remember what type of big cat they are, but they're also winged. And I actually met C.L. Wilson at Rare in 2022, so this is a signed book with quite a nice little paragraph there, and it was really cute actually. She had lots of like stuffed Tyrant on her table, as well as like stickers and book plates and stuff, so it was like really cool to meet her. But I think I just maybe got a little bit tired of this series because I did read the first 2 and a third books back to back. So going into this, we will see whether it was that I just needed a break, because I do actually think that I really benefited from taking a break from the Chorus of Dragons series, because at this point, like, I can't remember specifically why I disliked book 2 so much. Like, I can tell you some of the reasons why I didn't like it, but the memories, like, they're not quite so visceral. So maybe having taken a bit of a break from this will kind of reignite my interest in the series. I did read the prologue earlier. I'm only like 10 pages in, but I do like the writing style, and I also do like the fun classic atmosphere of it. So we'll see how this goes on second read. I did consider just picking it up from page 146, but I didn't think that was like a great idea, so I'm starting again. We are going to be having a pretty quick turnaround on this one, guys, because I went away and I read the first chapter. I made it to the start of chapter 2 and I remembered why I was kind of getting bored of this series. It is very much in the style of classic fantasy when it comes to the writing, which is fine, but I do feel like you've got to either be a fan of that or be in the mood for it. And I don't know if you guys have noticed, if you watch any other videos apart from Shelve It or Scrap It, I do really like epic fantasy. I love adult fantasy, but I don't love classic fantasy or things that are stylistically reminiscent of classic fantasy. Now, we've literally just talked about it with the Chorus of Dragons, which, while it has a different tone, also has a lot of conventions of classic fantasy. I'm not the biggest Wheel of Time fan. I don't like Lord of the Rings. I DNF'd the Earthsea series by Ursula K. Le Guin, and this for me has a writing style that is a little bit similar to some of those, as well as, I guess, the way the fantastical elements manifest in this series. But the one thing that I really cannot get behind, that I do not enjoy, is the main character and therefore also the romantic relationship. Now, as I said earlier, it's not that the main character isn't strong, that she doesn't possess strength, but it is that the society that she is in and has been raised in very much upholds traditional gender roles. Like, she has been sheltered through her entire life up until she's probably like in her early 20s at this point. She was betrothed to this man that she hated for like the benefit of her family. She then of course meets this Fae King, who is of course her one true love, and it's very much like has to go through a process of he has to ask her father for her hand in marriage, he has to impress the family to be allowed to marry her, he has to give her courting gifts. Like, it's very historical, I guess, and y'all know I don't like, this is the kind of thing that I actually don't like in historical fiction. It's the reason why historical fiction is not a go-to genre for me, and I feel like it mixes kind of like a historical romance with a classic fantasy. And while I don't think it's bad, and I enjoyed books 1 and 2, that of course was also 5 years ago, so if I read them now, like, I've read a ton more fantasy romance than I had at this point. When I picked up this series, I'd obviously read like all of Sarah J Maas, but I just read House of Earth and Blood, and I was looking to get more into fantasy romance as a genre instead of just waiting for like the traditionally published young adult romantic kind of like crossovers that we were having up until that point. So I was looking to explore fantasy romance, and this was highly recommended. But stylistically, it just just really isn't my thing. And I mean, I have already started this, made it 145 pages in, and there was a reason I didn't go back to it. Like, I was getting bored, and having read the first chapter and remembering some of the characters that we have and the plot elements that we have going on, the bad guy in here is very much, once again, like a Dark Lord, evil wizard kind of figure, which is very reminiscent of A Chorus of Dragons, of Wheel of Time, and I'm just not really in the mood to persevere with this anymore right now because it's so samey compared to what I'm currently reading and have been very recently reading. But also, I generally don't think my enjoyment of it is going to get any better. I feel like it could go along the same lines of A Chorus of Dragons, where I'm like, there's things that I like, but overall, like, I'm not immediately interested in continuing. So sadly, I do think that this one is going to be a scrap. So I'm going to go upstairs. I'm going to find a couple. I think I'll take 3 books from the stacks with me to see if we can shelve them upstairs, because as well as scrapping this, I need to take out my little resand donut bookmark, which has been hiding here for a long time. I need to get the 2 books off the shelves upstairs to also scrap. Sadly, they are all signed, and replace those with things from the stack. So I'll take 3 with me. I'll probably only be able to shelve 2, but we'll see what happens. So the books I'm going to be taking up with me need to be like quite far down the alphabet in terms of author names. So I think I'll take Done and Dusted by Lila Sage, Disenchanted by Brianna Shigalski, and The Veiled Kingdom by Holly Renee. The first 2 books, which are Lord of the Fading Lands and Lady of Light and Shadows, this is like a really nice matte cover, are both going to be scrapped. And I don't have a very big like area that I'm dealing with here, and also 2 of the books that I've brought up are tall paperback, so they're not really going to fit. So we're going to have to do some rejiggling, which is fine because it's not like anything's in alphabetical order anyway. Oh, I forgot that this can actually just go on the shelves. Okay, so I managed to get these 2 on, and The Veiled Kingdom didn't fit, so this one will be going back into the stacks. There is currently 2 zombie books on here, a sci-fi and a fantasy romance. Honestly, I would love one of the zombie books right now so that I don't have to read them both back to back later. So fingers crossed. Keep going, keep going. Okay, so this is the one of the 2 zombie books that I'm expecting to enjoy the least. Deadline is the second book in the Newsflash series by Myra Grant, which is the pen name of Shauna Maguire. So this is actually my second chance for Shauna Maguire, because I read, I think, the first 3 books in the Wayward Children series, and I don't like it very much. Like, it's okay, but once again, it's just not a series that is for me. But I wanted to try Shauna Maguire's more like hard-hitting sci-fi. I do also have Middle Game that I would like to try, but this is one that a lot of people, like, not necessarily recommended to me, but I know that it is a series that a lot of people enjoyed, and I'm always open to a zombie apocalypse story. But saying that now, I don't really feel like zombie stories are necessarily for me. I can't think of a single one that I've actually really loved and would recommend. But this one is a political dystopian, and it's following, I think, their siblings. And when the apocalypse started, so when the zombie virus became a thing and everyone started to die, the regular news media was letting everybody down by telling everyone to stay calm, nothing was happening, everything was going to be okay. And so the bloggers really came to the forefront and really saved the day in this situation, because they were the people on the ground reporting what was actually happening and giving people like actual true news instead of fake news or like whatever the government wanted to feed the people. I can't remember how long after the start of the apocalypse this is, but America has kind of righted itself again. There are communities of people, there are safe zones. I'm not sure if there's cities exactly, I can't remember, but there are definitely like pockets of civilization that are all connected. Like zombies are still around, they are still very much a threat, but life has somewhat resumed as normal. I think our main characters, they must be in like their late teens or early 20s. They have been invited to cover a presidential campaign for this like new left-wing president who is involving bloggers, because even though they were the people with the most credibility during the start of the apocalypse, they're still not like taken seriously by media in general. So this new president has invited bloggers to be the people that do the coverage of like the presidential campaign, and the main characters get involved in a suspected conspiracy to remove this president from the race because his ideas are too new, fresh and funky for the old guard to like accept. So it definitely sounds interesting. The thing that I didn't love about book one though is that it feels more like a speculative novel about how civilization, or maybe America specifically, would continue in light of a zombie apocalypse. So it seems like more of a think piece, like a theoretical experiment of like what would happen in these circumstances. And the focus of the first book was very much on the government conspiracy, the presidential campaign, more than it was the zombies. They were kind of just like a background threat in the world. And that I didn't find particularly interesting because I don't care about the intricacies of American politics, because as well, like, it's not my government, so like I don't understand it very well. Like, I know the bare basics, obviously, of US politics, I mean, especially like right now, but I don't know the intricacies enough to really appreciate the level of detail that this would go to, or to really truly care that much about the intricacies of a presidential campaign. I don't even really understand what it means to invite press to cover a presidential campaign. Like, isn't that just a free-for-all? Do you invite your own specific press? Like, I don't understand that, because I feel like in the US, the campaign process is very different than it is in the UK. So for that reason, I didn't love book one, but I was slightly intrigued to continue. I have spoiled myself for this though, because I was in Waterstones and I picked up a copy and I flicked to see how long it is, and it's one of those books where like the main spoiler is on the last page, and that's a shame actually, because there was like a really big thing that happened at the end of book one which I was shocked about, and I was intrigued to go into book two to figure out how the series was going to continue based on the end of book one, and now I've spoiled that for myself. Luckily, I still remember what the plot twist is, but I don't remember why it's a big deal. So going into this, like, once again, maybe leaving a period of time between books 1 and 2 was actually a good idea in this case. I really don't know with this one. I feel like it could very much go either way, but I think I liked the writing style, so at least there's that. I got back from roller skating probably about half an hour ago now, but I feel like my brain and my body are turned into soup. Had a really great time though, but now I think I'm gonna go take all of my makeup off, and I can't decide if I want a bath, but I'm gonna get some reading done anyway. But I need to give you an update on where we're currently at, because I have read a bit of this, like a decent chunk, but I'm 140 pages into it, and it's all right so far. I cannot promise that I'm going to finish this one at this rate, because it's interesting, it's fast, and it's engaging, but I don't like the tone that this is written in, and I forgot that I actually really don't like the voices of the main characters in here, especially the one that we are dominantly following in this one. It has a little bit of, I guess, like a noir edge to it. That's the best way that I can describe it. Like, it has the voice of like an old school detective, and honestly I find it so irritating. I hate the attitude of the main character of this book. It just has like a very cocky tone to it that I don't appreciate, and I actually think that the main character is a very unlikable person because of that attitude. Like, I don't know if I'm supposed to be rooting for the main characters of this series, but honestly I never have been. The good news is that this one is taking it a little bit of a step away from the political nature of book one. We are no longer following this presidential campaign. We are still following government conspiracy though, because this one is about a certain aspect of the zombie virus. So essentially it's born in everyone. Like, everyone has the ability to be a zombie, kind of like The Walking Dead, and it just lies dormant until you die, and then it like activates. But there are some people who have like a physical manifestation of it, like one of the main characters who has something in her eyes. Like, she has, the virus is called Kellis Amberley, and it makes her eyes look different. She has zombie eyes essentially, even though she's like human. And they find a report that all of the people who have this manifestation are being potentially hunted and killed. There's just like a discrepancy between the amount of people who have this variant and the amount of people dying. Like 38% of the people who are dying related to zombie outbreak incidents have this like manifestation of the zombie virus, which the numbers of the population don't add up to the amount that are like dying in comparison to like regular people. So they're investigating that, but this is something that has kind of cropped up over the years, like people have noticed, and the government agencies or like the projects the CDC have created to look into why this is happening have all been shut down, which once again of course hints at government conspiracy, which the main character thinks is going to lead into something that happened like in book one. So I'm enjoying that it is a little bit different in that regard, and that we're not so closely following this presidential campaign, and while it does still involve the government, it's not so focused on like that political, like that specific political element. That being said, this is a little bit of an action-packed series. Like we've already had a couple of car chases and I'm not too far in. I say car chase, it's more like people fleeing zombies in cars, and the main issue honestly for me is that I find the tone of the book and the voice of the main characters especially off-putting. The sad thing is though is that I am kind of interested in the plot, and I remember this being like an issue in book one as well. So for the moment I'm going to persevere. Like I said, it's not guaranteed that I'm going to finish this one. I could get to a point where I decide like it's just really not worth me continuing. I'm not especially compelled to pick it up right now, if I'm being honest, but I can't think of anything else to do because I'm tired, so I'll just read some more. I just got out of the bath and put my dressing gown on like the grandma that I am deep inside, and I was thinking about how I felt about book one in this series, about how I gave it 3 stars. There were not even necessarily elements of it that I enjoyed, but I found elements of it interesting, but I still had the same complaints about book one as I do about book two, and that is that I didn't like the voice and the tone of the characters. I didn't like the focus of the book. I didn't like the noir lean that it had, and it was very kind of action based, and I just thought like, why am I reading this book? Why am I reading book two? Because I'm still feeling the same way about it. And a few years ago I used to really try to like things, so I would read book one of something and I wouldn't really like it, but I'd be like, okay, so like I'll try book two and see if that makes it better. But I also am a person who is incredibly determined, and I love following through on things. Like I am the most reliable person that you will know, but I also am really not very tolerant to doing things that I don't enjoy. Like there's people who hate read out here on YouTube. There are people who are not enjoying a book but can still like power through the rest of it at the same pace that they would if they were eating up a book. I'm just not one of those girls. I'm not. I really like, if I'm not enjoying something, especially if I acknowledge that I'm not enjoying it, then it's game over for me. So I was in the bath and I read a little bit more of this and I was like, you know what, we're just gonna stop here. The thing is as well is that it's okay not to like things, and I'm a very firm believer of that. I always say it about people. Like if there is somebody that you do not get along with, that does not gel with your personality, that's fine. That's like being human. Like it doesn't mean that that person is a bad person or has negative qualities. It literally just means that they are not your person. So I don't know why I'm so happy to advocate for that when it comes to protecting your peace and choosing the friendships and the relationships that you want in your life, but I'm not advocating for that when it comes to something as trivial as like reading a book. Like I don't get it. I feel like something that's really important to me at this point as well is that because I read so much, I need to be compelled, like I need to want to continue to keep returning back to a book. And I do still love reading. I'm not gonna lie, like YouTube takes the passion out of it slightly. It's still something that I thoroughly enjoy, but because it's such a strong part of my daily life now, it's not really something that I regularly go like, oh my god, I can't wait to read, because reading is such an ingrained part of my day. It's not like I'm ever not reading, really. And there are times where like I'm sat at my desk and I'm like, oh, I can't wait to read a book later, but then it's just that feeling's not as strong as it used to be, if that makes sense. But because like I do read so consistently. I have to want to pick up a book. Like it has to kind of make me feel like picking up my book is a choice and not an obligation, and that it's something that I'm doing because I want to, not just because it's something I do, is like the point that I'm trying to make here. And this is not something that I want to pick up. This is something that I'm going like, okay, I'll read another chapter. And even though I just read The Memory of Souls, which I gave 3 stars to, this just proves that there is something about that series, because I read that 800-page book 200 pages a day without batting an eye, and I'm struggling to bring that energy for different books. So obviously, like, even though I was saying like I feel like I should unhaul that series, there is something. Is right, is it there? Is that it? Is it this one? There's something about that series. I don't know what it is, but there is something. And sadly, there isn't something about this to me. Now, this is something that was recommended to me a lot because I like sci-fi that has a really big grounding in logic. So something that you think, like, given the perfect circumstances, could realistically happen, like it is plausible. And this series definitely fulfills that. I think there's just a lot about it that I don't enjoy. The tone of this to me reminds me a lot of the, not in that they're similar, in that the way I feel about them is the same. It reminds me of Mistborn era 2, which is like the Western era of Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson, which is one of my favorite authors. And I just find it like very, very off-putting, and the character is very, very off-putting, like I find Wax and Wayne to be. So yeah, that's the thing that really killed this series for me. It's this book is deadlining, guys. That should have been flatlining, shouldn't it? Anyway, let's get book 1 off my shelves and replace it with something from the stacks. The one that we're going to be removing is Feed by Myra Grant, and I think it's not exceptionally thick, but it is a little bit chunky. So I could either get 2 small ones, but I can't find 2 that are around the same place in the alphabet, or one slightly thicker one. So I'm going to try and get Twin Crowns by Catherine Doyle and Catherine Weber in its place. So that's going to have to go up here a little bit. I'm actually not sure if it's going to work because the only other authors, I've got one with a H surname, one with a G surname that I don't want to shelve, and then the only others are an A and a B, which is, that's not too far up actually. I'll go get 2 other ones. The H is The Dry by Jane Harper, and that one, ow, I hate when that happens. Okay, we are just going to be getting the one on the shelf because this one was quite a tightly packed one. So now at this point we are 3 books out of the 7 that I have to attempt to read down, and in terms of the stacks I'm pretty sure we've reduced it from 70 to 65, so things are going in a positive manner. We have not come to a situation yet, because of my clever rearrangement of the shelves to get The Memory of Souls on, we've not come to a point where I like have to take things off shelves in order to shelve something. And I'm actually surprised because of the types of books that we had in this video, like the ones that I was going to be reading through, especially because, as I proved with Memory of Souls, because they are sequels, I'm a little bit more attached to them than I would be if it was just like a random book from the stacks. So to select the next one, we are going to be going back to the wheel, and we only have 3 left here. So the wheel has spoken, and I'm going to be reading Blood and Honey by Shelby McCurran, which, to be honest, I've been putting off for a very long time. So this is the sequel to Serpent and Dove, which was a very hyped fantasy romance of, was it like 2018, 2017? This is 2020, so I think it was 2019. And I gave Serpent and Dove 5 stars, although at this point, like, I honestly could not tell you why. Shortly after I did it, I was like, that's like a 3-star read. Why did I do that? But I think I kind of got swept away, and that like I got sold on the romance towards the end. But this is a relationship between a witch and a witch hunter. I think that the witch hunter is hunting down the witch specifically, and they end up, like, during this chase where he's trying to arrest her, they end up falling out onto a stage. Does he know that she's a witch, or does he just think that she's a thief? They end up in a compromising position in public anyway, and then the head of the witch hunters tells him that he has to marry her because the witch hunters are like holy. They're they're very tied to the church. This is a fantasy world, I'm pretty sure, but it is heavily inspired by medieval France. So they get married, but they hate each other. They're also obviously sworn enemies, but I'm pretty sure that he doesn't know that she's a witch. And over the course of the book, like, he comes to overlook his prejudices as they grow closer. Now, I didn't mind the romance in there, but the plot was a little bit messy, and I actually can't remember any of the greater plot. I remember there being like this big thing that happens at the end, but I have no recollection of what it is, so I'm definitely going to be looking up a recap of Serpent and Dove before I hop into this. Luckily, it is a hyped enough series that I'm pretty sure that I will be able to find one. Now, because I, in hindsight, didn't love Serpent and Dove, that is one of the reasons why I have resisted picking up Blood and Honey, and it's kind of just a book that I have that I've forgotten about at this point. But I've also heard really bad things about the rest of the series. Like, it's one of those series where every book gets progressively worse, which of course has also put me off. I'm going to check the Goodreads ratings actually, because typically with series, even though some people don't like the sequels as much as book one, generally speaking, the average rating on Goodreads of a series increases with every installment, because of course the people who don't like the books, like the first book, don't carry on into the consecutive books. Like, they drop off at various points throughout the series and only the true fans remain. However, there are a few instances where that doesn't happen, and that is generally where you can tell that a series actually does go downhill. So Serpent and Dove has a 3.98. Not a glowing review, but not too bad. Blood and Honey has a 3.5 rating. So that is quite a difference between the two. And the third one, which I also own because my friend was Unhauled in the series and I didn't have book 3, so I took it in case I wanted to read it, has a 3.95. So apparently this is the worst in the series. I actually thought that the general consensus was that it was book 3. This series, I don't know what my verdict is going to be, because I don't know how bad it is. Like, given the fact that apparently I got swept away by Serpent and Dove at some point in the reading experience, I feel like I could have a good time with this. I also do feel like my enjoyment of this one though is going to be dependent on how good of a recap of book 1 that I can find, because I would be so lost going into this without trying to look that up. What year did I read Serpent and Dove? I'm gonna say, actually, I'm pretty sure it was before Blood and Honey was released. 2020 I read it, so maybe it was just shortly before the release of Blood and Honey, but it was obviously, that was 5 years ago now, so quite some time. When we went roller skating earlier today, I was thinking, oh, like, it's been, I don't know, since COVID that I haven't skated. It's actually been longer than that. The last time we went roller skating was 2017, and I was like, that is 8 years ago. What the fuck? So yeah, time has really been blowing my mind recently, but I'm gonna start this one in the morning because I do need to find that recap. And also, I'm not gonna lie, when I decided not to continue Deadline, I picked up The Mistake by Elle Kennedy, which I'm dipping in and out of on my Kindle, and I'm just gonna spend the rest of the night reading that, and I'll hop into this one first thing in the morning. It's a chunky one. It's just over 500 pages. I think it's 530-ish, but it's not a full-size hardback and the text is pretty big. So in terms of like actual word count, I think this is the one actually that has the biggest text of what I've read. So I don't expect it being a particularly slow read. And I think I remember Serpent and Dove being like pretty fast moving as well. I have been slowly edging myself towards the page 200 mark today so that I could give you my first update on Blood and Honey, and then I decided to DNF. I made it real close as well. I made it to page 192, and for a while I was just kind of trucking along with this, and I was like, yeah, cool, like, I'll finish this book. I have no issue with reading it. And then I realized that I'm actually just really not having a good time. It's not that I'm not following it very well in that I'm confused in any way. It's that I'm not interested enough in it that I kind of keep zoning out while I'm reading it and then losing the thread of where I'm up to. Honestly, at this point in this video, I would be maybe starting to think that it's me that's the problem here, like the reason why I'm DNFing like so many books in a row. But I am actually, once again, like, I've been dipping in and out of The Mistake by Elle Kennedy, and I have no issues reading that book. Like, I'm having a great time. So it is the books that I'm reading that are the problem. Not me. I am both surprised and unsurprised that this is happening, because these are on a list of self-destructing books for a reason. Like, my self-destructing books are ones that I'm not sure about. I think that there's a chance, like a pretty big chance, that I don't want to continue with these series, but I don't want to let them go without giving them a try, and that is exactly what the self-destructing books are for, and therefore this episode of like Shelve It or Scrap It. So it shouldn't really be surprising me too much that I'm DNFing so much and that I'm not enjoying these books. But then also the reason why I didn't include all of the books we're reading in this episode the last time I did this is because I thought that there was more chance that I was going to be shelving these ones, which obviously causes complications in terms of the challenge. But here we are with our fourth DNF of this video. I actually thought that this one was going to be one that I finished because it's just not challenging at all. Like, the writing style is inoffensive, the story is inoffensive, the characters are a little bit offensive, honestly, they're a little bit annoying. Overall, it's just aggressively mediocre. With a lot of the series that I've been trying to continue on with or have continued on with, in the case of our one success story, which is A Chorus of Dragons, I have been saying how a lot of these series have benefited from the fact that it has been a while since I've read the first book, or like whatever the last book in the series I read was. It is not the case with this one, however. I did find a bunch of recaps of Serpent and Dove, so I did read through a couple of those before I started, and I was actually shocked at how little happened in Serpent and Dove. When I read these recaps, I got everything that I needed to know from very short summaries, but going into this, it starts pretty much directly after the end of Serpent and Dove, and we kind of go in with little preamble. It's not an overly complex story, so there's not a whole lot of recapping the intricacies, I guess, of what happened in Serpent and Dove. So what happened for me in this book, or didn't happen, I guess, is that I'm just thoroughly not immersed. I truly, honestly did not remember how little happened in book one, and I think that's why, even though I gave it 5 stars at the time, and I do honor that rating, because I think when it comes to rating books, even though I wouldn't give it that now, and if I could go back and re-rate it, I'd put it as like a 3. I think the most important rating is the rating that you give when you're in it, when you're feeling it, when you're actually experiencing the book, not how you feel like 4 years after when you've grown as a reader and you've kind of reflected and realized that you didn't love it so much at the time. So I stand by my 5-star rating for Serpent and Dove, but honestly I did expect a little bit more to have been going on in there for it to earn that 5-star rating, and honestly I just expected there to have been more going on in Serpent and Dove for it to have earned that 5-star rating, especially because for me the main issue I'm having with this is that I'm not engaged in the writing, because I say it all the time, like, if the writing's good, like, I can stick it out, I can persevere, and the writing is fine in here. It's just really not holding my attention. The fact that I've taken so long away from the series, and I do really think it is the kind of series that you should be reading like each installment shortly after the one before it, and that I just really don't care about these characters at this point, means that this series is going to be a DNF for me. Now I am sad because I do love my fantasy romance, and this was an iconic one of the era, and I don't love the cover of especially the third book. This one I love the first book. I love the cover of the first book. I could technically keep book one, but then I don't really have any attachment to the series, do I? Aside from the fact that, like, it's been on my shelves for a while, so I should probably unhaul the entire thing. So I'm gonna grab some books from the stacks to take upstairs. They're quite thick hardbacks, so I'm gonna take 4 paperbacks up with me, and I think I'm probably going to end up shelving 3. From here we are going to be taking the Book of Azrael by Amber Nicole. That's a good choice alphabetically. I'm going to take My Konomi by Susanna Nix. That is it for things that fit really well in terms of the alphabet, so I guess I will also take X's and O's by Amy Lee, and then maybe The Last Raven by Helen Glynn Jones. So we are unhauling Serpent and Dove, which I'm still sad about a little bit, and also Gods and Monsters, which leaves us this pretty big gap. We move up Casey McQuiston. I can actually maybe better alphabetize this before I start to put things on. So Moaning over here. Do they fit there? Yes, they do. Wow. Mellow, JKL. So that's right, but Emily McIntyre shouldn't be there. I don't think this guy will fit up here. Oh, that'll fit as well. I feel like I've got so much space now. JKL. No, J. Ooh, J. Jones. J. Oh, that doesn't fit there, okay. But they can still go there, right? Let's just put that back how it was. I understand now why it's like that. Sophie Lark go up there though? Nope. Let's just pop all of the Christina Lawrence back. And then I have McIntyre. So then I have Ambervina Cole. And now I have just like, I've got a gap up here. Christina Lauren, that's actually a better place for Christina Lauren than here, which leaves me quite a big gap here. McQuiston, McIntyre, no, too big. Mellow, yep. It's a real shame that that's just very slightly too big. You can then put Nixon. We're just gonna end up mixed up again alphabetically. I'm not sure if I've even changed anything at this point, but if I do that, you can also just randomly put this on. Here, once again, not alphabetical, but it's okay. And then The Last Raven by Helen Glynn Jones will be going back to the stacks. I didn't manage to shelve it. We are heading back to the wheel now for the final time to pick between the last two books from our original stack, which I have brought them up with me. We have Cytonic by Brandon Sanderson, and we have The Boy on the Bridge by M.R. Carey. Now, I'm pretty sure, or at least my prediction, is that the next book that I pick, whichever one it is actually going to be one that I finish. We'll see, of course, but I feel like I'm at least going to finish them, even if I don't end up shelving them afterwards. So let's see what it's going to be. I don't think I have a preference right now. Okay, we're going with Cytonic by Brandon Sanderson, which is actually where I think the 7th book that I need to read for this episode is going to come in, because I have been a very bad girl and I have not done my homework before I get into this book, and I'll explain what I mean. This book is thicker than I remember it being. So technically the correct reading order for the Skyward series, I can't remember what the series is actually called. I know it didn't officially have a name and it was supposed to get one. I don't know if it ever did. But officially in the reading order, before you read Cytonic, which is book 3, you have to read the collection of novellas, which is Skyward Flight. I have started this. I believe I've read the first one, yep, which is like 150 pages. And this is thicker than this book. Like, I didn't realize that the collection of novellas was actually so big. And my intention when I put Cytonic on the list was to have finished this by the time I ever got around to reading Cytonic. Lo and behold, the list expires next month, and of course that never happened, because do I ever do things like this that I'm supposed to? Absolutely not. But this is 617 pages. Now luckily I've already read like 160 of them, so I only have like 450 to go. But I think what I'm gonna try and do is read the short story collection, finish the novellas, and then also read Cytonic. Now, we'll see how I feel after this, because there is a chance that I just don't want to continue and I don't try Cytonic at all. But there's also a chance that I just don't want to go straight into Cytonic off the back of this. And so I'll pick up The Boy on the Bridge instead and then get back to Cytonic before the end of the vlog. But essentially my history with this series, how a Brandon Sanderson book ended up in my Self-Destructing books, is because I do not love Sanderson's YA. I think that Brandon Sanderson has this talent of creating very complex worlds and plots, but his writing style is super accessible across his adult, across his YA. Like, his writing style is not difficult at all. So it really frustrates me when I read his YA, because I feel like he really dumbs down his language and his tone and his writing style to like appeal to the youngins. But I actually just feel like it's just the complexity of like the world and the story that he's pulling back just a little bit, and his writing style is perfectly fine. So that gets a little bit annoying in this series, but it's actually the main character and also the repetitive nature of this series that put me off after reading book 2. And I heard that the 3rd book is pretty much more of the same. So in this series, the first book is called Skyward. We're following a girl called Spencer, and she lives on a planet that is at war with an alien race. So her father was one of the fighter pilots, and being a fighter pilot is like the most prestigious and important thing you can do in this society. And one day he deserts, and that makes him a traitor to like his planet, but also it ruins the life of Spencer and her mother. They're kind of shunned from society. Her mother's not allowed like a decent job anymore. Nobody will talk to Spencer. She's essentially bullied, and her dream is to also become a fighter pilot like her father. However, the government, everybody who's important important is trying to block this from happening because of her father being a deserter, and all of the people of her age, her peers, other cadets within this flight academy are all also gunning for her demise. And to be honest, she has pretty awful personality, so she doesn't make it any easier for herself. And one of the things that I love about book one is that while she really irritated me at the beginning, she grew on me throughout the course of that book as she kind of like developed a found family, like proved that she is not like her father. She's not a deserter. Like, she wants to be a fighter pilot and she's good at it. And her personality also improved throughout the course of that book, and I ended up really liking her. However, instead of like building upon the foundations of book one, book two does the same thing again. So it puts Spencer in a new location because of the plot. Like, it makes sense in terms of the plot, where once again she's an outcast, once again she's incredibly unlikable, and it's just a repeat of the same arc where she like gets to know everyone and everyone starts to like her and her personality gets better, and it's like, okay, but I literally just read this. So after that, I was put off reading book three. It wasn't incredibly important for me because of that to read the novellas. So sadly, I have heard from people who have read this book that it is once again more of the same. So I'm not holding out a lot of hope. However, I did really love book one. I love Brandon Sanderson, and so I want to give it a try. I will say though that in terms of Shelve It or Scrap It, no matter what I do with this series, it really doesn't matter in terms of the project, because these books belong on my Brandon Sanderson shelf and I don't have any Brandon Sanderson books in the stacks currently to replace these with if I do decide to scrap them. However, I will, of course, like, I don't have Wind and Truth yet, I don't have The Secret Project yet, so it will leave space for more Brandon Sanderson books to hit that shelf in the future instead of ending up in stacks. But I also think that if I decided to DNF this series, I will still keep book one because I really enjoyed it. I really like these editions, and to be honest, it's not a standalone, but it can stand on its own if it has to. So it's a book that I'm kind of happy to keep as its own thing and forget the sequels existed. So I've just done some reading sprints with my patrons, and in those sprints I finished the first novella in Skyward Flight. I did not enjoy it. I didn't, and I don't like novellas, so it's not overly surprising that I didn't have a good time. I know with Sanderson novellas especially as well, like, I generally don't love them because they aren't necessary reading, but they tend to take place outside of the main storyline or outside of the main location where the main books are currently focusing. Sometimes following characters that are like in a different area of the world, or the story's like relevant in a not a small way, but it takes a while to get to why the story is relevant to the main storyline. And for me, I do prefer generally like longer books. Like, the longer the better. And I think it takes me a long time to warm up to characters, to warm up to a world. So when you're taking me outside of the main narrative, you're introducing me to new characters, which isn't the case in this specific instance, but just generally with like the Stormlight novellas, for example, introducing me to new characters in new locations, and I'm kind of getting to grips with all of this. By the time I fully got myself oriented and I know where the story's going and I know all of the characters and I know this location, it's over because it's only like 200 pages, and that is how I felt about this. So obviously I've taken a few years away from this series. It's even been a couple of years since I read the first novella in here, and this collection is following Skyward Flight, who are one of the flight teams that are from that planet that I was talking about in my synopsis of Skyward that Spencer is from. So Spencer is our main character of the series, and as I mentioned, Starsight, which is book two, is just a repeat of Skyward. So it's like in a new location, there's new characters to learn, and so it takes it away from Skyward Flight a little bit. And what this novella collection does is it fills in the gaps of what Skyward Flight are doing kind of in between the books of the series or alongside some of the books of the series. The first two, which are Sunreach, which is the one that I read a couple of years ago, and Read On, which is the one that I've read now, take place, I think they're both in between Starsight and Cytonic, and I'm so glad that I spoke to Aaron today to check how relevant these novellas were because I wasn't having a good time, because the last one, Evershaw, actually takes place between Cytonic and the final book in the series, Defiant, so I don't need to read it right now, which is so good because I was having a terrible time reading this. It is following characters from the series that I've previously loved, but I personally have taken so much time away from this series that I'm not feeling especially connected to them right now because because on top of the fact that it's been a while since I've been into this series, since I've read anything from this series, they're also not incredibly present in book 2. So the last time I truly saw them was when I read book 1, which was, what year was it? This one was published in 22, so could it have been 2019? Let me just check that. 2020 I read Skyward, so that was 5 years ago that I last saw these characters. So I'm not feeling incredibly attached. I'm not incredibly invested in what they're doing. While the Skyward Flight are a main kind of part of this, the actual narrator of this novella is a character who I'm pretty sure we are introduced to in Skyward, but they're not like a core part of the cast of characters at that point. So it just wasn't a great way for me to get back into this world, I feel. And honestly, I can't really tell you what happened. The main character of this one, who is Illumicrate, I think, yeah, comes to Skyward Flight asking for help. That's all I can really tell you, because I can't remember what is a spoiler and what isn't at this point. But I think the reason Illumicrate needs help would be considered a spoiler for this series. But I actually couldn't really tell you any of the finer parts of this story. Like the first one, Sunreach, it does center around slugs. I do really like the slugs in this world, so that is a benefit, but that is about it. I was so disinterested, I was glazing over as I was reading the pages, and I could have DNF'd this here, but I don't think it's fair to DNF the entire series based on a 200-page novella when the main narrative of the story is following Spencer. That being said, I have not heard great things about Cytonic. I do think that the 4th book in this series is different because it is actually finally pulling everything together, but I would not be surprised if when I do pick up Cytonic, which I do still intend to try in this video, I would not be surprised if I did DNF it. So what I'm going to do right now is actually pivot and pick up The Boy on the Bridge, because I know for a fact, I think there's a chance I'm going to DNF Cytonic, but I know for a fact if I pick it up right now off the back of this novella, which I very much did not enjoy, I will be DNFing. And if it turns out that I'm wrong and I like Cytonic, I'll come back around to this and I will suffer through another novella just to wrap up both books for this video. But for now, we're going into The Boy in the Bridge. Now, I am hoping, because of how much I'm struggling with the Skyward series, I hope that I enjoy this book. I hope I at least finish this book. I'm starting to feel slumpy now as well, because I've DNF'd so many books in a row and I'm just not having a good time at this point. But what this has told me, because these were the ones from the Self-Destructing books video that I was more torn about and less sure that I would be happy to unhaul them. It has taught me that no, I was right about putting these on a list of Self-Destructing books. But this one is technically not a sequel. I think it's a prequel, actually, to The Girl with All the Gifts by M.R. Carey. That one is, or was previously, a standalone zombie novel following a girl who is kept in, I'm pretty sure they have some sort of school environment or something. It's a military zone where they keep zombie children and they're testing them. I'm not sure if they're trying to figure out the cure. They're essentially experimenting on these zombie kids. That is all I really remember about it. I remember the plot twist at the end, but I don't remember the specifics of the setup. I do think something that is very integral to the story though is that one of the people responsible for the care of these kids starts to grow an attachment to them. But it is a book that I'd heard amazing things about and it sounded like something that I was going to love, and I think I just heard so many glowing reviews of it that it disappointed me. Not that I didn't like it, I just didn't love it like everybody else did. So I did get The Boy on the Bridge because I did enjoy The Girl with All the Gifts, but because it's not actually a sequel, it's just kind of set in the same world. It's taken me a long time to get to it, and I also don't want to be disappointed by this one as well. So the back of this one, because obviously it's no spoilers because it's set before, it says, once upon a time in a land blighted by terror, there was a very clever boy. The people thought the boy could save them, so they opened their gates and sent him out into the world to where the monsters live. I don't think it explicitly says on it that it is a prequel, so I'm gonna have to double check that, but I think it is. Oh my, this was first published in 2017. I don't expect to dislike this because like I said, I did like The Girl with All the Gifts. This is just kind of because it's not actually a series, a traditional series, it's kind of ended up being something that I've just never really reached for, which is how it ended up on this list. So hopefully I'll have a good enough time that we have at least 2 books finished in this video, and I can maybe start to feel a little bit less slumpy as well. I fear that I'm entering my slump era, which I mean is always incredibly inconvenient for me, but right now when I only have 2 books left of this vlog, it is not great. So I mean, I know that you guys can't tell, but it has been a few days since I last checked in with you, and I have only just made it to the 200 page mark in this book, which is about halfway. And it is an incredibly slow book, I feel. I think that this book, or zombie books in general, actually either fall into one of 2 categories. So there's the super like action packed like zombie chase survival kind of stories, and then there's books like this that actually reflect on humanity, similar to the Feed series. They hypothesize like what would happen if a certain set of circumstances changed the world as we currently know it, and how humanity would survive, how this would behave, and how it would affect human behavior. And that is the focus of this little duology. Now I have discovered why this is a prequel story, and that is because it really dives into something that you only figure out at the end of The Girl with All the Gifts, and it's diving into that element a little bit more, which is essentially like the main reveal of the first book. And I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, there is a civilization in here called Beacon, which is the last bastion of humanity in the UK, and I think that the events of the first book are a little bit further removed from Beacon, whereas this is going to be dealing with Beacon a little bit more closely, I think, because these people have pretty directly come from there to embark on this mission. Now, in terms of what they're actually up to, they have this like big rolling tank that is going to transport them all the way from down south. I can't remember where they said Beacon is, but I think it's right on the south coast of England, all the way up into the Scottish Highlands to collect a bunch of experiments that past scientists have left behind, so they can, obviously they've left them in various places to see how the environment changes them, to see how like time has affected them, and they're collecting all of these samples, analyzing them, collecting live samples along the way to see how this disease, which is cordyceps actually, which is the same thing that's in The Last of Us, to see how it is evolving and changing, whether they can slow it down, whether they can stop it, because ultimately they are looking for a cure. The reason why cordyceps is something that is recurring as well, because if you guys didn't know, I saw a TikTok on this, is absolutely terrifying. Cordyceps is a real thing. Like, it is a fungus. I think it like latches into the nervous system of, I'm pretty sure it's insects, and does exactly what it does in like The Last of Us and in this duology, but just to insects. So apparently, just the science behind it, just because I actually do know this because of that TikTok, it theoretically cannot happen to humans because the temperature that cordyceps needs to survive and thrive is so much lower than humans' internal like core body temperature. However, there is a possibility that contributing factors like global warming, which is constantly obviously raising the average temperature or whatever of the environment of the earth, is going to cause things like cordyceps to evolve to survive in higher temperatures, which may eventually lead to it being able to create a zombie apocalypse using the human race. And I guess, I mean, I don't know a lot about the internal body temperatures of like various species, but I imagine that there's some creatures that are like in between insects and us that have like a body temperature that's hotter than an insect but colder than a human that cordyceps could potentially infect. I don't know, it's some scary shit. But I think at the time that I read the first book, I maybe hadn't played The Last of Us. I played that like, it was a while ago now. I want to say it was like 6-7 years ago, but I honestly can't remember how long ago I read The Girl with All the Gifts, and I don't even know whether I necessarily would have made that connection anyway. We're following a doctor, a scientist in here who is pregnant, which I feel like is going to play some big part in this story. It is already forming a point of contention because she's not supposed to be pregnant. It's compromising this mission that they've actually been sent on. But one of our other main characters in here is a little boy who has been taken with them on this mission because he is incredibly intelligent. He is 100% on the spectrum. Like, it's hypothesized in here they think that he might be, but I'm assuming that is because with the situation that like humanity society is currently in. They haven't taken the time or gone to the effort to actually investigate that and like diagnose him as you would in like modern society. He's incredibly intelligent, and when he was a little bit younger, he invented something that allows humans, it's essentially blocks your hormones and like your human scent, so that humans for a limited amount of time can move amongst zombies without them being scented and like hunted as prey. And so he has been taken on this mission in case he can make anything of the data that the adult scientists can't. And throughout this process, he starts to discover some of the things that you only really find out towards the end of The Girl with All the Gifts. So I'm assuming we're going to get more in-depth information on that specific facet. Now, we are bouncing around all of these other characters in here, and this is the part of this series that I really don't care about, because I don't think it's an especially character-driven series, and I feel like the way that the characters are regarded and described is quite cold and detached. It's not in a way that's supposed to like give you the warm fuzzies when you think about these characters, and it'll go into like obviously little snippets of their personality and how they've ended up in the position where they are today, but I actually don't really care all that much about that, and I feel like that is the more literary element of this series coming in. I think it's the storytelling that I don't love about this duology, and that was what was amiss for me with The Girl with All the Gifts, because there are elements that I'm interested in. I kind of reached a decision that zombie stories for the most part aren't really for me, but there are elements that I'm incredibly interested in, including the science. Like the fact that I remembered all of that cordyceps stuff from a random TikTok I watched last year shows you how I can like really get into like that kind of science thing. And something that I really love is science fiction that is, I mean, the reason why it's called science fiction, right, is because to me like it's somewhat plausible. Like cordyceps, as I explained, being able to dominate a human host like is somewhat plausible, and so I really love those elements. And like when we're talking about science fiction elements where you have that clear path of logic that shows how we can get from where we are now as a society to where we are in whatever the story is. And that is essentially the reason why I like this duology, but I don't think I like the focus on somewhat unlikable characters. I just feel like it's a waste of time if I don't care about these people, getting into the fact that like they never really wanted to be a soldier but they somehow ended up here. When you have all of these side characters but you're not spending that much time on them, they're essentially collateral damage. They'll probably get eaten through the course of the book, if I'm being honest. Yeah, it's the storytelling method of bouncing around all of these like tiny somewhat insignificant perspectives to tell the story, but the nitty-gritty of like the zombie infection, that bit I am completely here for. I don't love like the whole twist in The Girl with All the Gifts, which is what this is like super focusing on, but I guess I'm kind of interested in it in this one because it's going into the why. In The Girl with All the Gifts, they didn't know like what they were dealing with, and in here they do, or like they're investigating, they're discovering, and so they're theoretically also going to kind of figure out what's happened here, which is the bit that is interesting to me. So I'm feeling very slumpy, which is also holding me back on here. I'm finding it quite tedious to read because I don't like the storytelling, so I am immersion reading it right now. I'm listening to the audiobook on Spotify and reading along at the same time because I just, with feeling kind of slumpy, was just so ready to put this down at like a moment's notice. So yeah, I've decided to read it that way, at least for the rest of the day. Maybe I'll dip in and out of like doing other stuff while listening to the audio, and we'll just see how the second half of this goes. I'm not expecting to love this. I'm not predicting that this is going to be a shelve at the moment, but I am kind of invested enough in this moment right now to kind of see this one through. If you can hear purring, then it is because Hamilton is on my knee. He's just been on my knee on the sofa in there, and then he like followed me through and leapt up as soon as I sat down, so he is determined that he is having a cuddle right now, and he does have quite a loud purr on him when he gets started. But I'm here to fill you guys in because, surprise surprise, I have managed to finish another book. I know, are you shocked? I am too. But I finished The Boy in the Bridge by M.R. Carey. Honestly, could not have done it without the audiobook of this one because I truly was just not in a place where I was able to focus on reading a book physically, and it was only the ability to lock in and immersion read this through the audio and the physical book at the same same time that got me to the end of this one. And I actually ended up enjoying it, and I feel like it really came into itself about halfway through, around the page 250 mark maybe. So shortly after I had last checked in with you guys, and I do have to say, thinking back on what I said about this book in regards to the girl with all the gifts, I'm pretty sure that I'm misremembering what are spoilers and what are not about that first book. And don't worry, it's not that I feel like I've given you too much information about the girl with all the gifts to the degree that I feel you guys will be spoiled. It's more that I have said things as spoilers that are actually maybe part of the initial setup of the book. I did want to maybe watch the movie at some point when I was in the beginning stages of this, but honestly until I got close to the end I forgot that that was an intention that I had, just as like a quick refresh of the book. But I ended up enjoying this one when everything kind of came to a head. I still don't really love the way in which this story is told, and I found a lot of it to be quite unengaging throughout the beginning parts that felt a little bit tedious to read. But we do ramp up the action a lot in the second half, and it's more of all of these little perspectives that I was talking about the characters that you don't necessarily like. And I don't mind unlikable characters. I just have to have something to root for within a story. If everybody is unlikable and the pace of the story is a little bit slow, then I'm kind of reluctant to read it, because it's like, okay, but what is it I'm enjoying about this story? And if the answer is nothing, then you know, like, what's the point in continuing? But the tension slowly climbed throughout here until it eventually built to a head, and it built in a way where you have like multiple things popping off at once. So the end of this book was definitely kind of compensation for the slowness in the first half, because obviously all of these little elements had to build throughout the course of the book. I do still think that Emma Carey's strength is, I don't think it's necessarily within the plot, but I do feel like there is a little twist on what you expect from a story of this type, like a zombie story, a survival story focusing on humanity and also the science of the disease. I think that with both the girl with all the gifts and the boy on the bridge, the ending note was something that I didn't expect. And in the girl with all the gifts, I remember being a little bit disappointed by it. I didn't love the ending note of this one, but I actually really loved the way that this one developed. I would actually potentially be interested in seeing something else set in this world, another companion novel, although I would like it to be set around the time that this book finishes, as opposed to being like directly before or after the girl with all the gifts like this is. Does it say? I'm sure it said at the beginning. No, it must have been in the maybe the Goodreads synopsis that I read of this, where it gave me a rough idea of how many years before the girl with all the gifts this was. But I just feel like with the limits placed on humanity in the outcome of something like this, you have a lot of scope of possibility of where you can take a story, because the perspective is so like isolated, because communication is limited, that there can be all like very different kinds of things happening in different places across. This is set in the UK, but also throughout like the rest of the world as well, because people can't communicate and compare themselves to each other. Everyone has to kind of just like feel out the situation themselves and see what they can make of it. So in terms of my rating, I gave this one a high 3-star rating. It was very close to a 4. I just feel like there are a lot of things that I didn't love about this. Not in that there was anything like glaringly wrong with it, it's just I don't super gel with the writing style or the way that Emma Carey maybe structures stories, and I also find it to be a little bit uninteresting in parts. Like there are definitely stronger parts of this book for me, but there are also things that I really love. Like I love the place that this ended. I was actually very engaged when the action kicked in, and it's not like a high action book. We don't have things like zombie chases really throughout here, or anything like you would find in, I don't want to say like a typical zombie story, but we're not like running away from zombies and like splattering blood and gore everywhere, although there is of course some element of that. But the action in here was something that I was interested in, and I think it was because of the tension that was built throughout here. So I do think it did a good job. I did enjoy it, but I think I'm going to scrap it because I don't think I'll ever reread it again. I do think that this has made me low-key want to reread The Girl with All the Gifts, but I don't think I ever am actually going to. And if I were to, I don't think it would be anytime soon. And the reason I want to reread that book is because I want to have the knowledge that I've had from reading the prequel when I go through it, especially because I kind of realized after thinking on it that the information that I gave you in the last clip wasn't necessarily accurate to what actually happens in The Girl with All the Gifts, but I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon, which means that if I were to reread it eventually, I'd end up then wanting to reread this because I would have forgot like the finer details of this that I wanted to have in mind when rereading The Girl with All the Gifts. So I'm going to be scrapping this one, and I'm also going to be digging out my copy of Girl Without the Gifts to go with it, which is behind the stack. So I'm actually going to shelve that thought until the morning and just let you guys know what I'm going to be reading next, because this is obviously potentially going to be the last book of this vlog, depending on what my verdict is, whether I finish it, whether I shelve it, whether I scrap it, because that is of course Cytonic by Brandon Sanderson. I am still feeling a little bit slumpy, so I think I'm going to try and immerse and read this as well. I have some hours left of my Spotify for the month, and when I run out and I'll just have to read the rest with my eyeballs, if I even make it that far. But I do definitely think that taking a break and picking up The Boy on the Bridge was the right decision, because I know that I have just like a little bit of distance from the novella that I read, which is Redawn. I'm not necessarily enthusiastic to go into this, but I'm not dreading going into this. So I'm here to make good on my promise to dig out The Girl with All the Gifts to scrap it, but I've just been sat here thinking, like, do I really want to unhaul this book? And I'm just so confused as to why I'm so torn on this matter, because I said, like, literally when I was reading The Boy on the Bridge, I was like, well, I'm not going to reread The Girl with All the Gifts, so I don't need it, because it's also not like it was one of my favorite books. Like, it was one that I remember my overall thought, like the one thing that I think of when I think about that book is how I was disappointed by it because I'd heard so many people give it 5 stars and it didn't quite live up to that hype for me. So it's not like a book that I think of especially fondly, but I've been sitting here trying to think about what it is that's making me reluctant to unhaul it, and I actually think that it is because, not necessarily every year, but over the years as a whole that I've like been on BookTube, I've been reading more books than I typically used to. So I started off before BookTube, I would read like 35 books a year, up to reading about 100 now. And in my early years of BookTube, I was still very much like taking recommendations, reading things that people were talking about, but very much like reading things that I want to say picking up a little bit more organically, because it was stuff like intent had led me to pick up those books. Whereas now a lot of the things I read are chosen somewhat by chance, or I'm reading them for projects like through Shelve It or Scrap It. So when I look back on books like The Girl with All the Gifts that I read, I think in 2020, I have like a nostalgic attachment to it that I don't have with like The Boy on the Bridge, because I literally just read it. I know this is a millennial thing for sure, but also I am particularly hit by nostalgia. Like, it's something that impacts me a lot, and I think that's what it is. I also generally as a person am resistant to change, and The Girl with All the Gifts has been such a staple on my bookshelf for such a long time that I feel like my attachment to it is actually not to do with the story itself. It's to do with this whole like bunch of other stuff that is irrelevant to the actual book. So I do think I'm going to unhaul it. It just feels like a loss. Like, if I unhaul a book that I've hauled within the last year, I'm like, okay, that's fine, whatever. But if it's one from like 5 years ago, it's like I'm giving away a part of my soul for some stupid reason. Honestly, I started this clip and I was like, yeah, we'll unhaul it, and I was like, no, wait a minute, like I need to sit and reflect on whether I actually want to do this. But I do. I think we just worked through that together. So it is on these shelves behind me because it's a large paperback, my copy of The Girl with All the Gifts, which honestly is probably part of my reluctance because I love a large paperback. I think it's behind one of these 2 stacks, but we're gonna have to find something to replace it with. Now, of course, I can always replace it with a hardback, but seeing as that is the place where I tend to put large paperbacks, there is just one large paperback in here, which is The Helm of Midnight by Marina Lostetta. Now, this is one that I don't really want to shelve because it's one that I'm very intrigued to get to, and because I don't have any pressing reason to pick this up over every other book that I own, it's something that I would only pick up anytime soon if it were because of something like Shelve It or Scrap It. But this is the guy that best fits the job, so we'll swap these out, and then I actually have 2 books that I want to unhaul from the stacks, just straight up, and I'll tell you why. I think it should be behind this one. No, it's behind the second stack. I love large paperbacks. They're honestly like the best, like my preferred format of book. So it's especially sad for that reason. And can I get this in its place? That was actually a pretty seamless transition. The two books that I wish to unhaul from the stacks, one of them was one of these paperbacks, which is Trickery by Jamin Eve and Jane Washington. And the other one, very sadly, is one that I've literally just hauled, and it's from one of the subscription boxes I pay for as well, so I intentionally bought this. That is The Blood of Hercules. So throughout the process of Shelve It or Scrap It, we've obviously been learning things about my reading and about things that I like and do not like in books, and one of the things that I typically do not like and have never liked in any iteration that I've read it is reverse harem. And now you guys actually helped me out when I decided to unhaul all of the reverse harem or why choose books that I owned. However, one got missed, and that is Trickery by Jamin Eve and Jane Washington. Now my unhaul pile isn't going anywhere before you guys see this video, so do let me know if I'm right. I know that a couple of people commented when I was rearranging the stacks at the beginning or at the end of 2024 and said that this is one that I'd missed from my reverse harem clear out, and honestly I was just gonna leave it there until it came up and then talk about it then, but I was like, why bother? Like, there's no point me even trying this. I don't want to read it. And then this one, I knew that this was a fantasy romance, okay? I even read the synopsis. Apart from the fact that there are multiple male characters involved, it says, while unyielding gladiators Achilles and Patro hone her into a warrior, her professors, the two brooding heirs to the underworld, haunt her steps and her thoughts. So it implies that there's multiple male characters and that she may be attracted to more than one of them, but nowhere in this does it say that it is going to be a why choose romance. And I don't have anything against why choose romances in terms of like, I'm not offended by them or anything. I just have never read a book with a why choose romance that I enjoy, and so for that reason, because I have tried so many of them, I just choose not to read them now. So when I unboxed this in my January unboxing video, a bunch of you guys commented and said that this was why choose. Honestly, I had absolutely no idea. This is what happens when you're a year behind on watching booktube content. I'm just hearing about the stuff that was released in like February 2024 at this point, but thank you to everyone who commented on that video to let me know. There's honestly just no point me trying it, and considering I was disappointed by the edition anyway, it's not like I want to keep this because it's pretty. I'm just going to take the loss on this one. I would not have, because I do skip the majority of locked library books, so I would not have paid for this if I did not want it and think that I would enjoy it, but I had no idea that it was a why choose as well. So these two are going to be hitting my scrap pile, my unhaul pile. I'm just going to do a quick count of where we are right now, because obviously we've just taken 3 books out, I think. Before the episode actually like ends and I give you whatever my verdict is going to be on Cytonic, I will do a recount because I normally count more than once just to make sure. But by that count that I just did, we're down to 59 books in the stacks. So we've removed 11 during this episode, which is actually pretty good going. I had no idea that we were doing so well. I have noticed when I sit here that my camera likes to focus on the books and Brie instead of me. I'm trying some things to fix that, so please, I know like right at the beginning of this video it was a thing, I'm trying to fix it, but I don't know what it is. Like if I sit in front of books, my camera's like, I want to look at the books, and you know what, who can blame it? But I am, speaking of books, I'm reading Cytonic and I'm 127 pages into it, and very sadly at page 127 is where I am going to be putting this series down for good. I was listening to the audiobook along with this just because I still need a little bit of help with focus. It was fine, like I was reading it, but I wasn't reading it for any reason. You know, I was reading it for the sake of it, and I very much felt like I wasn't enjoying it. There were elements that I like I really like Embot, and when I said, when we were talking about Skyward Flight, I said that it frustrates me because I feel like Brandon Sanderson dumbs down his writing when he writes for a young adult audience. It's not that he dumbs it down, it's that he makes it silly goofy, and Jay Kristoff does the same, and it really annoys me because I just feel like it's unnecessary. Like, teenagers can be serious, it's just the automatic shift from serious for adult and silly goofy for young adult that makes me feel like young adults aren't being taken seriously. That's just my opinion. I obviously also understand people like silly goofy books, and I also understand that, as we've discussed earlier in this video, I'm not a silly goofy person. I am very sad about this one because Brandon Sanderson is a favorite author of mine, but not everything is for everyone. So as I mentioned, I am keeping Skyward. I really enjoyed Skyward, and I feel like I could reread that in the future and still enjoy it and read it as a standalone. So I'm going to be unhauling Skyward Flight, Cytonic. These two are both DNFs. These were books, I guess, 5 and 7 for this video. And then off my shelves, I am going to be unhauling Starsight, which is the second book, which is one that I also didn't love. Oh, I was sent this by the publisher. I didn't realize. So pretty. As I mentioned though, that does not have any impact on the stacks because essentially I've just given myself room for one Brandon Sanderson hardback book, and there are at least 5, I think, that I need to buy when I get caught up with the Cosmere again, and they're the next books that I actually need to read. So in the long run, it's not really done anything, but I just really wanted to finish up the Self-Destructing books video. This is actually going to be the first Self-Destructing books video that I've ever completed, so that's cool, I guess. And I felt like it was 2 birds, 1 stone, because I am aware that a lot of the stuff that I would normally be doing, little mini challenges and stuff, I'm not doing because I dedicate so much time to Shelve It or Scrap It, and then after that, like, I mood read a little bit and read the rest of my TBR. So I thought it was cool to kind of achieve something else that also impacts Shelve It or Scrap It as well. So in terms of what we've done for the video, because that was the final book that we needed to resolve, 7 books that I attempted to read for this one. This was another high volume DNF episode. I DNF'd 5 of them actually, and the last one, it was more surprising because the books that I was DNFing are ones that I actually thought that I would really enjoy. For this one, I feel like it is a little bit more reasonable. I did think I was going to enjoy more of these books than I ended up doing, but they were self-destructing books for a reason. And I mean, even the one that I finished and saved, it was mid, and I do, there's just something about that series has me in a chokehold, and I wish I knew what it was. And then this one is one that I did enjoy. I just don't really feel like I need to reread it. I think a lot of the enjoyment in this one is the reading of it, and it doesn't hold any value for me kind of like past that. Because of the nature of the books that we read, with them all being sequels and all self-destructing books, I also unhauled 7 books from my shelves, which were all of the ones associated with the ones that we attempted to read, which resulted in us shelving 9 books from the stacks. Now, this is a better outcome than I expected. Like I said, I expected to enjoy more of the books than we tried to read for this video. I expected to want to save and shelve more of the books that I read for this video, but there was just the one, and the one, just the rearranging of my shelves allowed me to get that one on, and also to shelve 3 books, which means we've had a pretty decent turnover for this one. And then on top of that, we have 2 books from the stacks, which I can't get them the right way, that I decided to unhaul as well, as I explained to you in, I think it was the last clip. So then overall for episode 13 of Shelve It or Scrap It, I managed to shelve 10 books in total, and I managed to scrap, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have another accident with these books, I can tell. Can I even get them all in frame at once? I'm struggling. I hate mass market paperbacks. I managed to scrap 15 books in total. Are they all on screen? I can't tell. Oh, they're heavy. I usually film the little bit that goes at the beginning that says how many I shelved and scrapped per episode when I'm filming the next episode, but I ain't getting all these out again, so I'm going to do that as soon as I've finished here with you guys. And then of course, through shelving the 10 books and scrapping 15, I did do another count to double check on the stacks, and we are left with 59 books into stacks going into episode 14. Of course, when I do my February unboxing, we're going to have a little bit of an increase, but I don't think it's going to be too many, and overall we've made quite a dent in the stacks this episode. So I am gonna go, I'm gonna love yous and leave yous. This one has been a long one, and I mean, it wasn't intentional. I didn't know I wasn't going to enjoy the majority of the books that I read for this one, but it has made me a little bit slumpy. And when I was reading Cytonic, I thought like, oh, is it me? Like, am I generally just slumpy and that's why I'm being so unresponsive towards this book? But I decided to pick up the next book on my TBR, which is a book club book for my Patreon, and start that to see, and I'm engrossed in that. I want to read again. So I do think that the book that I was reading, or the books that I have been reading, were the problem, and that I can get my reading mojo back next week. But thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Shelve It or Scrap It. If you are looking out for the next one, then that will be probably around the same time in March, and the next vlog on my channel, I'm pretty sure, is going to be a day in my life, so please look out for that if you are at all interested. But aside from that, guys, I do hope you've enjoyed this vlog if you've made it this far. If you have, please don't forget to like if you liked it, and subscribe if you wanna, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you're real go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.